Welcome to the CharityVillage Connects podcast. A recent TELUS Health Mental Health Index indicates that employees experiencing workplace conflict lose up to 55 days in productivity per year. The impacts of conflict at work are clear: lost productivity, but also stress and diminished mental health for the staff who experience it. In this episode, we'll explore the contributing factors, including power dynamics, racism, microaggressions, and mounting workloads. We'll outline an organization's legal requirements to take action and leave you with some practical solutions and strategies. Please welcome Eileen Chadnick, an award-winning ICF-credentialed executive coach, workshop facilitator, and writer, specializing in career navigation, leadership development, culture building, and communications. Principal of Big Cheese Coaching in Toronto, Eileen is author of the book Ease, Manage Overwhelm in Times of Crazy, and has been a contributing columnist with the Globe and Mail's career section since 2007. Welcome to the podcast, Eileen.
Thank you, Mary. I'm delighted to be here.
As we dig into the issue of workplace conflict, perhaps we should start with some of the neuroscience that impacts how individuals deal with conflict. What should we know about this, Eileen?
Well, our brains are highly sensitive to threat, and they actually operate in a very sophisticated and unsophisticated way as a threat detector. And do you know that it takes 0.07 seconds for the brain to decide whether or not a situation is a threat or otherwise? It may not be a real threat, of course, but if the brain decides this is a threat, it comes from a part of our brain known as the limbic area. It basically shuts down all that other good stuff that we need for relating. Our critical thinking, our reflective ability, our ability to take a wider perspective, all that is bye-bye thinking capacity and hello, threat. And it gets us really ready to either fight, defend, or get the heck out of town.
So how does this factor into the trauma responses that some individuals might have in a conflict situation, like fight, flee, freeze, or fawn? How does this impact how they may relate to it at work in a conflict situation?
Trauma is something that is hardwired into our brain. So there's a part of our brain known as the limbic brain that stores memories. And the brain very quickly sizes up a situation. And if it looks like that other threatening experience that one may have, it very quickly labels this as threat too. So depending on the individual, whatever experience that they've had in their past, if it looks, feels, sounds like that other tough situation that traumatized them, it'll be wired, and they will very quickly catalyze all of the stressful reactions in the brain, in the body. And so, it's things like, for instance, maybe they had a bad situation with a direct boss who used to give feedback in a way that was difficult to hear. And it would make them feel unsafe. Going forward, even if they were in a new environment, a new workplace, and even if it did feel pretty good on many levels, if they get an email or a call saying, hey, I want to offer you some feedback, their trauma response quickly connects to their past experiences because they've been wired in. What that means is that all of us are walking around with all kinds of wiring of memories that felt small t traumatic or big T trauma. When we think about trauma, it's not always the dramatic giant trauma that we hear about. It could be just things like a toxic boss or a toxic environment, or time when we felt embarrassed or shamed. So trauma comes in many sizes, but the thing to remember is that it wires into our brain, and the implication of that is we lose our critical communication skills, we lose our ability to listen and try to seek to understand, And all of that has a big negative impact on our ability to relate with others and to navigate what we might perceive as something that is conflict or, tricky bits that occur in the workplace.
I think I've heard about this as being referenced in some writings I've read as like the lizard brain, that part of us that responds without our capacity to be able to really expect or anticipate it or control it. Is that what we're talking about?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people can reflect stories back where they've heard of the lizard brain or the reptilian brain. I like to bring my little puppet here. I don't know if you can hear the bell ringing, but I have two puppets that I like to show. One is the lizard brain, and it resides at the back of our neck, which is the limbic area, and that's where the amygdala is. The amygdala is just a small little area back in there, and it quickly sounds the alarms and it emits all the chemicals. But what it basically does is it completely shuts down our reflective cognitive abilities. So here's the other part. Here's the other brain character. If you want to touch your forehead, this is the prefrontal cortex, and this is what is referred to as the higher thinking brain. And I have a little pair of glasses on my little kitchen mitt puppet here, because this part of the brain is what helps us navigate everything. It helps us navigate what might be perceived as conflict, difficult situations. It's the thinker. It has great skills. The only thing is that it's a slower, more reflective kind of thinking process. And if the alarm bells of the amygdala and the reptilian brain start to sound, it's basically bye-bye prefrontal cortex, higher thinking brain. They do not operate on the same stage. It's one or the other. And so, is it a lion, a tiger, or a bear? Oh my, you're going to invite the amygdala. However, a toxic boss is now the replacement for what lions and tigers or bears. Or it's not a toxic boss. It could be a perception of a difficult conversation. Oh my, I have to deal with that person. We're going to have conflict. That is going to be difficult. That is like a first-class invitation to bring on board the alarms, the amygdala, the reptilian brain. However, there are strategies you can learn. Here's the good news, is although it takes 0.07 seconds for the brain to decide amygdala, fire, alarm, difficult person, and that's really fast. That's why we've heard of the term hijack. Our brains get hijacked. The good news is, with more mindfulness, more attention, and some really easy to develop skills, we can learn to tame that brain, quiet that amygdala and that fear and that sense of trauma or fright, and we can bring up online our lovely thinking abilities, our prefrontal cortex, that will help us navigate much more fluently and with much more confidence and success the conversations that feel like they might be difficult, but they actually might be something entirely different.
So, what are the common approaches to actually learning those techniques to be able to allow our prefrontal lobe and our thinking to catch up to the initial sort of lizard brain response to what might be perceived as a threat?
There are some fabulous go-to strategies. I'll talk about a few. The first one is to start to pay attention. If you feel your body tensing up, it usually starts in our body, or you feel your ruminating brain talk in a way that speaks the language of threat, that the first thing you need to do is pause. And if you could grab yourself a few seconds, even just a few seconds, simply name and notice what is going on with yourself. So if you notice, say, I'm noticing I'm feeling stressed quietly, if you can step away, I'm noticing I'm feeling stressed. That small little activity of labeling, or I'm feeling anxious. I notice my heart rate is up. I'm noticing I feel uncomfortable. It sounds really small, but that brings up even a tiny bit of that prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, because it requires cognition to do that. That teeny tiny move gives you a small opening for even more good work that the prefrontal cortex could do, which leads us to a couple other easy tips. Should I offer a couple more?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the next thing, once you've noticed you're in that threat state and you've named it, and you might want to pause. You might need to take a little more of a pause. So if time allows, breathe. Exhaling is actually a calming activity. Of course, you need to inhale in order to exhale, but pay attention to a longer exhale. It actually draws back online the part of our nervous system called the parasympathetic that will provide more calming forces, all kinds of fluids. And once we get into a better state, we can even access more of our higher thinking brain. So breathing intentionally, spending a bit more time to exhale. And then there are some very practical thinking tips. Once you have your prefrontal cortex brain back online, one first thing you can do is reframe what you've labeled as conflict could possibly be something else. It could be de-escalated. It could simply be differences of opinions, or it could be we may be coming at things in a different way. I have a little story of a client who I was helping prepare for job interviews, and I asked the question, how do you navigate conflict? And he said, oh, I never have conflict. And at first I thought, no, that's not going to fly. But I let him speak, and he went on to speak about how he looks at conflict as an opportunity to better understand, to have a deeper conversation, to be curious, and to be of service and to solution with another person. This gentleman was right on the mark. So you can reframe. If it's not conflict, what could it be? It's a conversation. We might have differing perspectives. It's an opportunity for both of us to explore. Now, the next tip, if you've settled down that threat brain, because the words that you use to label a conversation, your brain is paying attention, very close attention. So the word conflict can be a trigger. The word conversation, less so. Now, the next thing you want to do is get curious. I mean, really curious. Not to ask questions to lead the person to your way, but to ask questions to genuinely seek to understand. And so in doing that, that person, first of all, might even be disarmed by your sincere curiosity, and they'll feel, without even realizing it, a little, maybe even taken aback and appreciative that you are giving them a chance to be heard. Two more quick things. The next one is to try to seek common ground. We might have things that we disagree on, but let's start with what we do agree on. And if we can co-create a shared aspiration, you're already in a partnering mindset as opposed to an adversarial mindset. And there's a lot more, but I'll just share one last little bit, and I think some of our other questions may further unpack that. But show up with a little bit more transparency and vulnerability. So it could be, I'm sorry that I'm coming across stressed and it's not targeted to you, but I really care about this project, and I guess I'm starting to just feel a little nervous about its outcome, but please, know that it's not targeted to you, or something around those lines. So those are just a few starting tips, but there's lots more.
So when we talk about approaches that individuals can take to resolve conflict, are there any inherently good or bad in terms of how they may be responding conflict? Should we consider using different types of approaches depending on the situation?
We 100% can consider an expanded repertoire of approaches, and there are some better approaches to choose over others. So some of the blind spots that sometimes people will inadvertently react to are not helpful. But if we could intentionally choose strategies, they're more from the frame of responding in a more effective way. So one thing that can happen is um, we may not be aware of the assumptions that are feeding, the conclusions that we're making. So we very quickly run up a conclusion ladder, and that's where we're coming from. And so one of the that's a mistake. A better approach is to say, let's check in and seek to understand a little bit here. What assumptions are you having about my situation? How can I provide clarity? And maybe you can help me make sure that I'm on the right page with some of the assumptions I might be having. So we want to make sure that we're checking in on one another's assumptions. Another breakdown that can happen is in clarity. We do walk away from conversations thinking we understood what the other person meant, but really we are walking away with an understanding of what we think they meant. So I'm going to quote it's a famous quote from Robert McCloskey, who's passed on, but he's a famous writer, and he says, "I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant." Now, it takes a little while to process that, but where could that breakdown occur? The breakdown could occur in somebody's own listening. They're listening through the lens of their biases. They're already knowing. A lot of times in conversations, people are waiting for somebody to stop talking so that they can say their part, and they're pretending to listen. So they're filtering through, what's my next move? But it also can happen even if somebody shows up and is sincerely listening and curious. Another person might convey what they thought was clear, but really it was not. And so both parties can take responsibility for providing clarity, but also, and I just had this conversation with a client minutes ago today, to say, what rituals have you put in place to make sure that the beautiful gems of clarity you think you provided in a conversation were actually heard and understood as you intended? And this client said, bingo, we just landed on a blind spot. He said, I've spent so much time trying to make sure that I'm communicating clearly and simply. And I tell them again and again, I said, well, what are you putting in place in that conversation that gives you both a chance to check in safely? Did what I say land as I intended? What did you hear? What did you take away? What's the meaning you derived from my words? And we now have a chance to clarify any miscommunications before we leave with muddles of emotions and misunderstandings. So those are really a couple things. And another thing I'll share is, please don't lose sight of the fact that words have meaning, worlds of meaning, and what they mean to you might mean something different for somebody else. So if somebody comes and sends you a message and says, oh, about that proposal or about that report, we have to talk about it. We need to have a conversation about it, period. Are you free tomorrow? What have you? We need to have a conversation about it can mean many things to somebody else. That could be yikes to one person, or it could be neutral to somebody else, depending on your triggers, So be cognizant when you are, for instance, a leader and you have a positional hierarchy saying, I want to give you feedback. That could be a very scary thing. And so think about the words that you use, because our interpretations could be vastly different from one another. And that's okay, but if there's a time frame where that person's waiting, their fright brain, their threat brain could start to generate assumptions and conclusions and stories. And all of a sudden, and I've had many clients that have come to me, I'm thinking of one fabulous leader who lost 3 days of sleep because she was having her performance review and she had never received any feedback along the way. And so that triggered fright. Turned out all was well. She was loved, respected, and, pat on the back. But words like, we're going to have your performance review, we're going to talk about this, or I disagree with a few things, let's talk. Disagreement for some people can trigger conflict. And for other people, it's, oh, I'm curious. I wonder what that person's thoughts are.
But surely some of these things can't be avoided. I mean, performance reviews are, commonly occur in a workplace. If you aren't aware that that could trigger some sort of inherent fear or panic in people, how can you address that? The fact that they're going to have a performance review.
Oh, that's a great question. So, any conversation, one of the things that we teach, I actually, in addition to having a coaching practice and training, I also teach coaching skills to leaders. And so, very often we lift the curtain and say, these are the things we do in coaching. And as a leader, you can do that too. So, any conversation, one of the things that's incredibly important is be careful about focusing so much just on the transactional aspect of the conversation. We're going to be talking about your performance, or we're going to be talking about the report you wrote, or whatever it is. It's always very important to, in a very genuine way, connect to the person, the who of the person. So it could be not just small talk for the sake of warming them up, but it could be sincere, like in addition to how are you, how was your weekend, but also how are you feeling about our conversation today? And people will hopefully, if there is some degree of trust, they'll share a little. Oh, I'm nervous, I feel apprehensive, or I'm excited to hear what you have to say. And tapping into making sure that you're really focusing on the person, and if they're feeling a little nervous and you're aware that that might be the case, you might even say something up front to help them settle down. So it could be, hey, I'm excited about our conversation. There's so many good things that you've so much growth that I want to acknowledge and make sure you keep doing. And I have a couple stretches for you, which I think will be wonderful to help you to continue to grow. So anything you can do to help that person settle down and feel a little bit more trust can go immediately open up. We really, I really want to emphasize, this is an audio and I don't have a slide, but somebody might start off apprehensive, but depending on how you're showing up early in that conversation, you can very quickly get them from scared or skeptic to more comfortable and then fully engaged. But it really means that you need to be listening, not only talking. I'm talking a lot in this conversation, but in a conversation, there needs to be a genuine demonstration of wanting to hear their viewpoints, of acknowledging, even if you have different perspectives, acknowledging and validating other people's views, and really showing respect for the person in the conversation, not just the topic at hand. That was very long-winded. I apologize.
Oh, not at all. What are some of the common blunders or missteps that you see people taking when it comes to addressing conflict in the workplace, and how can they be avoided?
There's a lot of common blunders that can be avoided. Let me mention a few. One is entering the conversation with a win-lose mindset and focusing only on how to win, and those are your aspirations, because that already is, that person, even before you say anything, this speaks to neuroscience. The brain can intuit and can feel. There's mirror neurons, and it sets the stage for distrust. So instead of win-lose, again, try to have a win-win shared aspiration. Try to genuinely seek to understand, and absolutely you want to be understood as well. But if in your huddle you can both share that aspiration of, let's understand one another and see if we can solution together a shared aspiration, that would be great. When you're in a win-lose, you do a lot of telling and selling and yelling. Okay, you repeat yourself, and you maybe even raise your voice, or maybe some of the language, and it's very positional, and that goes to the win-lose hierarchy. Instead, go back to that partnered, collaborative curiosity. Doesn't mean that you're throwing your aspirations out the door. You're equally entitled to have a stand for what's important to you. But watch out for telling, selling, and yelling. Instead, get better at asking genuine questions. Help me understand your position a little more about that. Or would it be okay if I shared a little bit more about my position on that, because there may be more to it and I'd love the opportunity. or what do you think about this? But asking not from a leading, like a lawyer, on the stand. Sorry, no offense, there's some wonderful lawyers, but this is a different conversation. Asking questions you don't yet know the answer to. That means it's sincere. Now, the other thing is, again, as I would have alluded to at a different part of our conversation, is watch out for transactional dialogue. And that is where it's only about the project and the widget and the policy and the this. Remember to connect to the human being. You're two human beings that have values, that care, that are concerned. And you want to connect to both of your whys. Why is this important to both of us? And even if you have divergent opinions, really respecting that person. I'll allude back to an example I share frequently, and it may have made it into some of this podcast. Is a gentleman who said, "No, I don't do conflict." And well, one of the things that he said, and this has shown up with many of my other clients, is even if at the end of the day you don't land on a unified stance, and you have to either say no or agree to disagree, if you've had a respectful, collaborative, genuine conversation where you are seeking to understand, you will still leave that conversation with more equity into the relationship bank. And, you may need to say, I'm so sorry. I'd love to be able to say yes on this if you're the decision maker, but I can't this round. But I really appreciate everything that you've shared with me, and I really appreciate where you're coming from. And I hope next time, if we find ourselves on divergent paths, that we will be able to find a way. And I really appreciate you, and how you were in the conversation. So some relationships have come out of, I have stories upon stories, difficult conversations, but the relationships, even though the thing was not perfectly resolved, the relationship actually grew. And that's an opportunity. If there was never conflict, that opportunity wouldn't have even existed. So there's something to reframe your brain about what is the opportunity that we have as two people in what we're labeling as conflict. What else is possible for our relationship? And so that is one of the things. Another quick thing, if that's okay. Do I have time for another quick?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
You can keep me all day on. I have truckloads of these tips. Another one is being overly protective and trying to save face. And so that doesn't serve anything. So when you're a little bit more transparent and even a little vulnerable, that is a very powerful trust building move if it's sincere. So if it is saying, this really matters to me. I have so much at stake with this project or this report or what have you. And so that is why I'm probably paying even more attention, and why my why and my care element is so hard. I really, really want to make sure that our patrons are served, because I'm going to be authentic here, and I'm making up a little story, but we missed the mark on an earlier program, and it's so important to our patrons and the people that count on us. And so that's why this matters even more. And so if you can be more authentic, and again, it goes back to that who you're being as a human, why it matters. But be careful about getting overly concerned about looking good and saving face. And be very, very careful about being right and focusing on winning. Instead, focus on doing the right thing, not just for the project, but for the person in that conversation together. There is room for it all. And that's why what we label as conflict or potentially conflict conversations, when we learn how to navigate them with a little bit more humanity, with calmer brains and mindsets, and more access to our beautiful abilities that most of us do have, but they get hidden when we're experiencing trauma, there is so much more potential for good things to happen, even when, or almost especially when, we're experiencing conflict.
Is there any strategies that you'd like to share about, I guess, doing a sort of a self-analysis to figure out whether there are traumas that have affected oneself, and what are the triggers that could cause someone to respond in an unhelpful way to a situation that they may see or characterize as a conflict?
Well, all of my work really is framed in how to be an even better leader and how to be an even better human leader. And that speaks to your own humanity, and that speaks to how you relate to others. So when you ask if there are traumas that one would have, I would even invite us to reframe that and say there 100% are. There's no human being leader. Maybe the AR will soon come and they'll be trauma free. But all of us have our little small t traumas. And so, what I would encourage a leader to have a little observer on their shoulder and notice when they're feeling that tension, notice their reactions, and get curious about them without judgment. Get really curious. Notice, oh, I feel myself getting a little tense. I mean, I do, and I teach and coach around this stuff. I'm thinking back to something that just happened, a little while ago, and I noticed I was getting defensive in my thinking, and I was shutting down, and I was feeling bad. And I thought, oh my, look what's happening. And being a coach and all, of course, it took me a little while, though. I didn't settle down right away. So don't expect, like, it's not like ordering a pizza, you're going to get it off the bat, but live in the curiosity for a bit. And if you can, do some reflective writing from a place of love and compassion and just say, I wonder why. Be in the space of, I wonder what about that triggered. I wonder which of my past experiences with something similar, whatever, might have ignited that. And what is it? What's the self-talk? Get really curious. What's the self-talk about the meaning that I am making about what happened? What's the meaning? And then if you can really get good at just if you can just keep getting curious and unpacking the layers, ask another question. What assumptions am I holding about this situation? And what evidence do I have? Might there be assumptions I should challenge? And if I did, what if I tried on a different perspective? How would that make me feel? And so we have exercises like coaches, but that can help you walk through that. But hopefully some of the narrative that I'm offering is basically pause, get curious with yourself, and just keep asking yourself questions in a loving manner and a curious and with a light touch. And you can de-escalate, and I'm not kidding, in just a few minutes you might have an insight. Something might open up. You will feel it somatically. You will start to think different. And even just any one or two of those questions, guess what it does? It invites your higher thinking brain to the table. So even a question like, I wonder why that bothered me so much, invites your higher thinking brain and quiets the limbic brain. Or I wonder what meaning I'm making out of that. Same thing. What assumptions am I making, and are there any that I might challenge? Full on higher thinking brain that is more expansive, has the ability to be more positive, can be more solutioning, and you get a beautiful dose of the beautiful hormones that calm you down. GABA, even oxytocin, if you're connecting with somebody else, oxytocin, that hug drug. And so your hormones and everything is better and more possibilities. It sounds like magic, but guess what? It's neuroscience.
Any final thoughts or advice you'd like to share to our audience?
Yeah, I just want to say, I've been coaching as one of the earlier trained coaches back in the days when people used to say, oh, neat, what sport? And so over the years, I've worked with so many people and I've learned a lot. I learned from my clients. And I want to say that if you want to be an even better leader, and it doesn't have to be a positional leadership role, you can be anywhere in the continuum of your work. You want to have a great impact for yourself, and you want to have a great impact on others at work and in the continuum of the communities you serve. Invest some time with yourself. Start with you. Start learning about you. Be generous. Learn about your values. Be generous when you're feeling triggered, and be there for yourself as best as you can. Learning to be there for yourself, because the portal to being better with other people does start with yourself. So when we talk about conflict, very often people are looking immediately to others, and there's a bit of a blame. But if you can start with yourself and check in on your own thinking and your own reflection and the meaning that you're making out of that, you might open up a whole portal that changes the conversation to something completely different. And then there's, of course, many skills that we talked about, and the skills are never ending, Mary. So it's not about mastering this, but it is about developing some more mastery and how we engage with ourselves, how we engage with stress in the world. And I just invite you to give yourself that gift however you do it. If you do it on your own, you do it with peers, or if you're able to hire somebody to support you, but do it.
Well, Eileen, thank you for your really, truly fascinating insights into the brain and the human condition, and into workplace conflict, and all of your practical advice. It's been truly, truly fascinating. Thanks for joining us on Charity Village Connects.
Thank you for having me.